Hello, I'm here in what will eventually become our new fruit cage. I mentioned on the tour video that the central bed behind me had already been planted with raspberries. Those plants arrived in December, a little earlier than I'd expected and before I'd started this channel. However, I did video the process and I will run that for you in just a moment. I'd just like to apologise for the occasionally dodgy sound in that recording. I was wearing a mic, but for some reason that recording didn't work and I had to rely on the microphone on the camera. So I do apologise if on occasion the sound is less than ideal. Anyway, here's some footage from December. Well, it's a chilly December morning here in the garden and I'm about to do some work in the fruit cage. At the moment there's no fruit in the fruit cage, as you can see behind me. It's completely empty and that's due to the garden renovations we've been doing this year. Because of that, we've got quite a lot of plants to put in this winter. Apple trees, plum trees, cherries and lots of soft fruit, so raspberries, Japanese wineberry, blueberries and currant bushes and gooseberries. Now most of those will be bare root specimens, so they're planted in the dormant season, so typically the winter months, although sometimes you can get them in at the very end of autumn or sort of into early spring. Some of them will be potted. I think all the blueberries are potted and possibly one or two of the others might come in pots, but for the most part they'll be bare root. Now I rather like planting bare root trees in particular. I think they establish much better than pot grown specimens, and all of the raspberries will be bare root, and that's what's been delivered this week. Now I would have preferred to plant them in February, but there are some advantages to getting them in early. So if you plant later in the season, there's a chance that young shoots will already have developed. They might only be an inch or two high, but they're very fragile at that early stage and it's so easy to break them off when you're planting. And also, if you're buying from a garden centre, you never know how long they've been hanging around there, and it's much nicer to get some plants that have been freshly dug. So the reason I would have preferred to plant next year is simply because this bed hasn't been prepared that long ago. The ground in this part of the garden is pretty bad, so it's very stony, very compact. You literally can't get a fork into the ground, not even if you jump on it. It's so hard. So the bed I'm going to plant in today, that had to be hacked out with a grub axe. If I show you some of the actual soil, you can see what I mean. So looking down here on the pathway, you can see how much stone there is. This is just what's visible on the top of the soil, and this stuff is rock hard. There's just no way to dig in this or to plant in it. Even the few weeds that we've got here, they can't really get their roots down much further than the top inch or two of the soil. It's so hard. So you might wonder how we managed to turn this into some half decent soil, and we could of course have built a raised bed, quite a deep one, and filled it full of new soil and compost, but instead of doing that we hacked out the top foot or so of hard soil and removed it, then broke up the base of the trench until we could get a fork in. All of that had to be done with a grub axe. Having broken up the base, then spread a thick layer of manure, and then sieved back the soil to remove all of the large stones. It's quite labour intensive, so we've only done it in select areas within the fruit cage. But having sieved that back, we then spread a thick layer of manure on the top and forked that in, and then we spread some composted green waste on the top of that. So the idea was to break up all the compaction, get out the larger of the stones, and then get plenty of organic matter in it, because without that this soil really wouldn't be up to much. It was what was left after sieving out was small stones and and very sandy, silty soil. Not great for growing in, but now it's had plenty of manure and lots of organic matter, and it should be much better. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off the temporary cover and have a look at it. So having uncovered it, the soil doesn't look too bad. It's been sitting here for a couple of months now, and I can see activity, signs of activity in the soil. Certainly I can see some worm cast, which is a good sign. This was pretty poor soil to start with, and now it looks like we've got a good chance of getting something to grow in here. So you can see here some signs of worm casts, which is good, and if I turn that over, you can see the dark layer of compost on the top, and underneath we've got this rather sandy soil. We do have some clay in the garden. It sort of runs in seams in particular places, but mostly this is a sandy, silty soil. Now it does clump together, and that's the silt particles, but you can't deform it without it breaking up. This is a little heavier here than I would like, and that's entirely because it's had almost no organic matter fed into this, and very little growing in this area for so long. So it would have been nice if we'd had a lot longer to transform this into some good soil. But we'll have to make do with what we've got. Most of the garden here is maintained on a no-dig basis, so all we normally do is spread a thick layer of organic matter, manure or compost of some sort, on the top, and leave it to the worms and other goodies in the soil to deal with that and make a nice environment for our plants. This area is a little bit different, and it's only different in this one instance when we've had to prepare this bed for first use. From now on there'll be no digging in this bed. It will simply be topped off with compost or manure, probably in the winter. Right, there's one job I need to do before I can plant the raspberries in here, and that is to straighten up the edges of the bed. I don't know if you can see that the edges here are just a little bit wonky. They're leaning in towards the bed, making it narrower than it should be, and while I've got the opportunity, I'd like to straighten those up by putting some pieces of timber across the bed. So that's my first job. This post is bent quite badly, so just going to straighten that up with a bit of help. Now this is quite a big drill I'm using here to make these holes. I always like to put a good sized clearance hole first, otherwise you can never get this to pull up tight against the post. is solid. So very often I'm a bit disappointed with bare root raspberries. I've never had any problem with other bare root trees or shrubs, but raspberries tend to have a pretty rubbish bit of root on the end. It's often not much more than a dead stick, and sometimes you can have difficulty getting them to establish, but these look like they've got lots of roots on. I'll have to wait until we've teased them all apart to find out just how much each individual cane has, but it looks pretty good. So we've got 4 different varieties in here, and this is some decent looking fibrous root on here, so I'm quite hopeful that these might have a good chance of establishing. Now I was going to give these roots a soak. I often do that before planting out, but really there doesn't look to be any need. They're really damp. So I've got 4 varieties here. This is Joan J. Now that is a fantastic autumn fruiting raspberry. This is Tulameen. That is a late season raspberry. I've got Glen, that's a very early fruiting sort, and I've got Cascade Delight. Now I don't know much about Cascade Delight, but this should be a mid-season sort. So the idea here with selecting these 4 varieties is to give me as big a spread of fruit across the season as I possibly can. I'm also going to plant them in fruiting order. The other side of our fruit cage is a big wall. This is a south facing wall, and then I've got sheds and some more wall along the side. So what I end up with here is a real sun trap, and in all likelihood the southerly end of this bed will be just a little bit warmer than the other end. So I'll put the earliest fruiting sorts up near the wall, and they can get the most benefit from the little microclimate that we have in this corner. I'm just going to open this bundle up and split them. Yeah, these look pretty good. There's more root on these than you often get. Yeah, it looks like those are actually attached, so that's all one plant. That's not quite so impressive. This is not unlike a typical raspberry cane for winter planting, but I don't really like it with that little root on. Wow, that's a monster. This plant was obviously growing really well. Wow, that's fantastic. This is what I would really like to see on all of them. I mean, this is a really vigorous cane. You can see that from the width of the cane, and the amount of root on this plant is fantastic. And there's already signs of a new shoot. I'll give you a close-up on that. This here will be the new cane for next year. Now it's really important when planting this not to damage this and break that off. As you can see, they're not very big, and it's so easy to just snap that off when planting. Yeah, this is an amazing specimen. Very pleased with that. Okay, so 1, 2, This, on the other hand, well, that's broken there. I don't have a huge amount of hope for this, although nestled in the base there is the signs of a new shoot, so maybe something will happen with that. Now, the normal planting distance for raspberry canes is about 45 centimeters, so 18 inches. I will probably be planting a little bit closer in these beds. I'm also going to plant a double row. In our previous fruit cage, we had our raspberries planted in a double row, and it worked really well. And to make the most of the space we've got here, rather than one single row, I'm going to plant 2 rows that we can work from both sides of the bed. It's also worth allowing for the possibility that some of the canes might not come up next year. So I'm going to just space these out roughly where I want to put them. I think 4 on this side. Now these 3 scrappy bits, I'm going to put these together. That's the best prospect, and hopefully something comes here, otherwise we're going to have a hole in this bed. So although I do have 10 canes here, I'm going to put these 3 fairly close together because I'm not at all confident about, especially this one, I'm really not confident about that one growing. Now, an important point to remember when planting raspberries is that they are, generally speaking, rather shallow rooted. This is a slightly unusual example. It's got such a deep root going down. You can see where that's been broken off. But they're usually quite shallow rooted, and you really don't want the top of this to be more than an inch or 2 below the soil level. If you plant them too deeply, you may well find that nothing comes up. So I'm going to space the rows roughly here and here, and that should give them enough room widthways to develop. I'll be quite happy if a reasonable thicket develops down this central bed. Just looking at whether I can separate these canes. They're not so firmly attached, but maybe it's best to leave them as they are. Now this one I'm going to have to be very careful with, not damage that shoot. It's got a very impressive root on it. So I'm going to have to take out a bit of a channel here to get that root laid in nicely. Got some roots going this way, and I'm quite happy for them to spread out nicely over the bed, as I really want these canes to spread out quite a bit in this soil here. Having planted these canes, it's a good idea to cut these off. I mean, these aren't supposed to grow next year, but I'm going to cut these off about 6 inches off the ground. Right, all they need now is a drop of water. Now, of course, I'm not watering these because they need water. I mean, it's pretty wet at the moment. The soil's quite wet enough for the plants. But the idea is to wash that soil around the roots, so I get good contact with the roots and help settle them in. So that's it for now. These are done, and I won't have to do anything here until sometime next summer, I would have thought, when the new canes hopefully will be making an appearance and will need tying in or staking to something. So I'm going to carry on and do exactly the same with the next 3 sections of the bed, and I won't get fruit next year, but the year after, with a bit of luck, I should have a nice succession of fruit, starting with the earliest variety right down to the autumn fruiting, and that will fruit probably until the first frosts appear. Joan J we've grown before and really recommend it as a very fine autumn fruiting raspberry. With most of my fruit and vegetables, I tend to pick older varieties. I find them more interesting to grow. The problem with raspberries and also with strawberries is that they're quite prone to virus, and so the old varieties have more or less disappeared. Many of the old strawberries, they're simply not available, and the same is true of the raspberries. You can occasionally find something like yellow Antwerp, an old yellow fruited variety, but to be honest, the modern varieties of raspberry in particular are very good, and it's one of those few crops where I'm very happy to grow a more modern sort. They're not all so modern. I mean, this is a few decades old now, Glen, and Joan J's been around a while. So it's not something that's come out in the last couple of years, but by my usual standards, that's pretty modern. From these, Joan J and Tulameen, we know, and we know they give great flavoured fruit. Glen is a new one for us, and Cascade Delight, I think, is a more recent variety, and that's also new for us. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this bed planted up now. So that job is finished now. I've got 4 different beds of raspberries, and the first 3 are all summer fruiting sorts. I'm not going to get a crop until the year after next. The one at the end though, Joan J, that's an autumn fruiting sort. It's possible I might get a small amount of fruit next year. Depends how well they establish themselves, how quickly they get going. But otherwise, I'm looking forward to lots of raspberries in a couple of years' time.